Okay, there we go. The last one. We got one more Cherokee purple to do right here at the end. All 9 planted nice and securely in the ground in the greenhouse. Hey guys, you may be asking yourself, what in the world does this have to do with main idea and details? Okay, so what I'm gonna do is we're gonna watch this video, and once you're done watching the video, what I want you to do is I want you to think about what the main idea of the video you just watched was and what are some supporting details. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna give you an example. Also, remember that there are sometimes more than one answer. Just because I come up with one main idea and the details to certain things, there might be something else that you think is the main idea that's different wording. That's completely fine. We're also going to discuss things that were part of the video that weren't part of the supporting details for the main idea. So stay tuned, guys. Real quick, I'm going to talk about some things that I've done in the past that have been mistakes. And from what I've read, these are common mistakes that people often make when they're planting tomatoes. Planting tomatoes anywhere. First things first, you need to know the difference between what type. You need to know what type of tomato plant you're planting. The majority of tomato plants out there are meant to vine. They're meant to vine along the ground and create a root system along the ground and grow along the ground. So these types are called indeterminate tomatoes, and the majority of tomato plants are indeterminates. Okay, so every tomato plant I grow is an indeterminate, and what that means is they're going to continue to grow up, always up. They'll grow out as well. Oh man, 30 degrees difference out here. So they'll continue to vine. If you do it correctly, you're going to have them vine. They can grow 20 feet. So that's what an indeterminate tomato is. Indeterminate means that will continue to grow and continue to grow until there's not enough sunlight or not enough warm air or water. So the majority of the tomatoes I'm growing, so the Cherokee purples, Amana orange, cherry tomatoes, and I'm also growing brandywines. They're all indeterminate. They're going to continue to grow. And by the time the end of the season comes, I'll show you how long my tomato vines are in there. They're usually about 20 feet. I think last year they were about 18 or 20 feet. So they continue to grow. And the method I use, the drop and lean method, will allow them to continue to grow. The other type of tomato you can get is a determinate. And these are the type of tomatoes like bush out. Some do this. But I'm not a big fan of the bushing determinate tomatoes because you basically get one big yield out of them and it stops growing and it stops producing fruit. So I like the indeterminate because they just continue to produce fruit. And here in the greenhouse, they'll continue to produce fruit until October, November. So basically have tomatoes from the end of June to November. It's a long time to get tomatoes. Biggest mistake that I've made or I've seen other people make when growing tomatoes is planting them too close together. When any plant is planted too close to another plant, they're going to be fighting over nutrients, fighting over water. Anything that it needs to grow, it's going to be fighting over. If it has a lot of foliage and it's next to a lot of other plants, it's going to be fighting over sunlight too. So I don't ever, in the past I've planted tomatoes very close together. Not a good idea. What ended up happening was not enough airflow got to them, and they end up getting blight, early blight. They get fungus. They start getting all these diseases because they're too close to each other, and especially if one tomato plant leaf is touching another, then it's going to pass that disease on to the other. This happens with cucumbers as well, but right now we're just talking about tomatoes. So I try to make sure they're at least 18 inches apart. One year I planted about 12 inches and it was a big mistake. So at least 18 inches apart is the good rule of thumb that I like to go by. Another mistake I've made with planting tomatoes is planting them in an area that gets very little sun. If you plant your tomatoes in a shaded area in your yard, you might, the tomato plant will grow, but you're not going to get a lot of fruit, especially if you try to grow a large variety. If you try to grow Brandywines or some kind of beefsteak tomato and it doesn't have a lot of sunshine, you're in an area that doesn't give you a lot of sun, then you are not going to get many tomatoes. Okay. Another piece of advice, just from my experience at growing tomatoes, is I would recommend, especially if you've never grown tomatoes before and you want to give it a shot and you don't have an area with a lot of sun like I do. I luckily, my back of my house faces south and I get almost all the southern sun. I mean, I'm still getting sun everywhere except for a few spots in my earth garden right now. And it's later on in the day, so it's around 4 or something. It's really important to get that morning sun and the evening sun. So my recommendation would be to start with a cherry tomato, something that's going to give you a lot of fruit, because they will start faster, you will get more, and they will keep producing. You're gonna, if you're just a regular homeowner and you want to grow tomatoes and you grow 4 or 5 indeterminate cherry tomato, most cherry tomatoes are indeterminates. You grow 4 or 5 indeterminate cherry tomato plants, you're gonna have so many cherry tomatoes you're not gonna know what to do with, especially if it's in full sun. So I mean, that's one of those things that it's just, I mean, you know, and this advice I'm giving you right now is just advice from things that I've learned. It's not, I mean, it's just not like definitely a rule. It's stuff that mistakes that I've made. And then the last but not least, when you plant your tomatoes outside, you are relying upon nature. And when you do that, sometimes if you have a summer that gives you rain all summer, your tomatoes are done. Okay. If tomatoes have too much water, they produce tomatoes, but the tomatoes will pop out, they will split, you'll get more disease. There's a lot of things that happen when tomato plants are overwatered. One thing I find, when tomato plants get water on their leaves and the water is allowed to stay on their leaves, that's when disease happens. So what I do is, a lot of the tomatoes I do, and the last year I did solely tomatoes in my greenhouse, is I bottom water them, so I drip irrigate my tomatoes. Tomatoes work extremely well with drip irrigation, so you're not watering the actual leaves on the tomato plant. Okay guys, once again, this is just some advice that I have for tomatoes, because it's about that time of year. Start putting them in the ground, and if you have any questions, please ask them in the comment section. And I hope you enjoyed the video. All right guys, bye. Real quick, I'm going to talk about some things that I've done in the past that have been mistakes. And from what I've read, these are common mistakes that people often make when they're planting tomatoes. Planting tomatoes anywhere. Biggest mistake that I've made, or I've seen other people make when growing tomatoes, is planting them too close together. Sun. If you plant your tomatoes in a shaded area in your yard, my recommendation would be to start with a cherry tomato, something that's going to give you a lot of fruit. When you plant your tomatoes outside, you are relying upon nature. All right, guys, what I have done is I have mapped out this entire video with kind of like a narration of it. A narration would be like a written version, okay? So we're going to talk about this a little bit. I've color coded it, and so it kind of makes sense as to what we're looking at. So I'm going to go ahead and read it to you guys. Starting up here. Tomatoes can be tricky to grow, but if you follow these handy tricks, you can have your own tomatoes this summer. Be sure to plant your tomato plants far enough apart so that they are not competing for nutrients, water, and sun. This will allow each plant to be very healthy and produce many fruits. Tomatoes need full sun. Plan to plant your plants in an area that can get direct sun all day. If you have never grown tomatoes, start by growing a smaller variety. Cherry and grape tomatoes are perfect because they don't need as much sun, water, and nutrients to produce fruit. You may also want to plant your plants in a hoop house or a greenhouse so that you can control how much water each plant can get. This will cut back on diseases that tomato plants can get. If you follow each of these handy tricks, you are sure to have some amazing tomatoes this summer. All right, let's go back and look at this. You can see that I've labeled the topic sentence in red, and I've put right here, the topic sentence can help you with the main idea. So this is where I'm going to get my main idea from. This is not necessarily my main idea. So if you are looking at this topic sentence, you do not have to write down the entire topic sentence for your main idea. Main ideas are not always located in your topic sentence. Sometimes the main ideas are located all the way back down here in your conclusion. This just so happens that both of them contain part of the main idea, because my conclusion restates my topic sentence. Okay. Now, in blue, you'll notice that I've numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are actually my 4 supporting details for the main idea. So I'm going to go ahead and read this up here again. Tomatoes can be tricky to grow, but if you follow these handy tricks, you can have your own tomatoes this summer. Now, my first supporting detail is be sure to plant your tomato plants far enough apart so that they are not competing for nutrients, water, and sun. Now, I'm going to show you something right now. I'm going to move this over. I created a main idea web. I put my main idea here in the center cloud, and then off of each is where I put the supporting details. Remember what we looked at before, and remember that your supporting details need to hold up. They need to prove, they need to support your main idea. Our main idea that I came up with is there are some handy tricks to growing tomatoes. Okay. Now, each of these will be a detail that support that because of this right here. What are we looking for? We're looking for some advice, some handy tricks, okay? So, first one I said, plant tomatoes far enough apart so that they are not competing to grow. Now notice I left some stuff out. Look right here, my original sentence says, be sure to plant your tomato plants far enough apart so that they are not competing for nutrients, water, and sun. I didn't have to say all that. Okay, I kind of shortened the detail in my own words. I'll come back to here again. Plant tomatoes far enough apart so they are not competing to grow. Does that support that? That is one of the tricks or tips or whatever you want to call it for growing tomatoes. I would give it a thumbs up and I would say definitely yes. My next one says plant tomatoes in an area with full sun. Do you guys remember that from my paragraph? Let's go back. Well, it just so happens to be number 2 right here. Plan to plant your plants in an area that can get direct sun all day. Notice once again I shortened it. Plant tomatoes in an area with full sun. It doesn't have to be the exact words, but it has to say the same thing. Is this yet another handy trick or a tip? I would say yes again. All right. So now let's go down to number 3. It says start by growing a smaller variety. I added that again right here. Start by growing a smaller variety of tomato. I didn't have to list the smaller varieties. That would be going into too much detail. And last but not least, plant your tomatoes in a controlled environment, a hoop house or a greenhouse. And that was included right here. Plant your plants in a hoop house or greenhouse so you can control how much water each plant can get. Did I have to include everything? No, I didn't. Now, here's my next question. I had a whole bunch of other information in here in this paragraph. What about this other information? Is this other information supporting details? Let's see. It says, this will allow each plant to be very healthy and produce many fruits. Well, does that part right there talk anything about a trick? Does it tell you anything about some tricks or some tips to growing tomatoes? I would argue that it does not. Okay? It doesn't say anything about a trick. It is describing the first detail. So all of these other sentences that are included that I did not underline, what they're doing is they're explaining the detail. Okay, so they're actually going into further details and explaining. If I did not add this information, all of this information that is not underlined, what would have happened would be this paragraph would not have been complete. It would not have been as much information as I would have wanted to say. It would not have explained it fully.